Yesterday, we all enjoyed the keynote of his co-founder, Adrian Locher, and today we welcome the CTO of Merantix, the ambitious Berlin-based venture studio. He is also co-founder and board member of the German Association of AI Companies. He's one of the masterminds behind Hack Zurich, the biggest hackathon in Europe, and he is, among many other things, a RoboCup Junior World Champion. Please give it up for Rasmus Rothe.
Thanks for the kind introduction. So I'm going to talk about tech trends and business model trends around AI. And I hope you take something with you after this talk. I will talk about three different pillars as part of this talk, but what actually qualifies me to talk about this. So we are a venture studio, Merantix. We are building AI-first companies here in Berlin. So what we do is we take founders or potential founders with us, work with them for 6 to 12 months, test and validate a lot of business ideas with them, then incubate a company with them. We invest even up to 3 million euros per company, and then also help these companies to scale. We've been doing this for the last 4.5 years and actually started a few AI companies. So for example, Vara in the space of medical imaging that is right now live with a medical product, helping in the case of breast cancer diagnostics. And also Sia Search that is giving a talk today here at Rise of AI, which is focused on data management, on handling large unstructured data sets. And finally, also Merantix Labs, where Nicole also will give a talk today, which is around really building customized AI solutions for clients. And recently, we actually started 2 new companies, Causa and Cambrium. Causa focusing on explaining KPI changes, so the AI buzzword around it is causality and causal inference, and then Cambrium, which is at the intersection of biology and machine learning. And we actually plan to build 10 more companies in the next 4 years. And so we've just started 2 companies and we are planning to build 8 more companies. And that obviously poses the question, what areas are we looking at? And as I mentioned before, with these entrepreneurs in residence, with these founders, we work 6 to 12 months. We test and validate a lot of potential business ideas around AI. And so we've made quite some learnings over the last couple of years, but we have also looking forward a few areas we are particularly interested in. And that's what I want to talk about. I want to share some of the things we've been looking at or we are looking at the moment and where we believe there could be a lot of potential for building AI-first companies. I want to structure the talk actually in 3 parts. So I will talk about surely technological achievements as a second thing. That is maybe the most obvious, so seeing where is research also advanced. But before that, even focus more on kind of industry trends, understanding what are industries, spaces where it could be interesting to build a company. And then the last part, which is a bit overlooked sometimes, is also business models focused all around AI that are very particular to this. And starting with the industry trends, I want to talk a bit about first maybe also the last, I guess, decades of innovation. So I think if you look at the startup landscape, we've seen a lot of these lone dropout founder paradigms. So the idea basically that you have a group of people, 2, 3 people who maybe dropped out of college or dropped out of a company and then started working on a company. And so we've seen a lot of these kind of more execution-heavy B2C business models where you need great execution. They're very hard to build. You need to usually raise a lot of capital, but also you need relatively narrow domain expertise. I mean, many of those people come right out of university or just have a few years of work experience, and I think that's what we've seen in the last decades, especially also very much in Berlin. And I guess one trend which we've also seen is that things get democratized. So if you think about how easy it is now to build an app, how easy it is now to launch a direct-to-consumer brand, you can get something live within a few weeks. And even within AI, right, like with all the open source and also tools out there, you can easily get a machine learning model to work within a few hours even. And that has really gradually pushed, I guess, the innovation for these kind of more low barrier spaces. And what I want to talk about is kind of the next frontier. What we believe is that there's going to be a next frontier of areas for the next decades, 10 or 20 years, where you can basically start companies which are in space that are much more complex in terms of the research, which are touching much more regulatory hurdles, and where there's still a lot of potential and which are often still very untouched. And this is taken from an article from Danny from TechCrunch. He called it the dual PhD problem. So basically areas where you not just need to be an expert in AI, but you also need to be an expert in another domain. And it's not about the PhD, it could also be 10 years of work experience, but like it's areas where you have the AI expert and you also have somebody who knows another domain like really, really well, and it's something you can't easily pick up in a few weeks. And for example, healthcare is such a space, right? Like if you're great with like training algorithms on data, sure, that's awesome. But like you also, in order to be successful there, you really need to understand the healthcare sector, regulatory, the incentive systems, all the medical terms. And so for that, you need somebody who has been in that area for a few years. That's not something you can pick up in a few days. And so you need both people coming together and also understanding each other, which usually is the case. I mean, talking very different languages, right? And so I think making that work and going after these dual PhD problems is super interesting. And that also actually poses, some, I guess, different view on how you build teams in this space. So if you think about, again, the lone founder dropout paradigm, you usually have a group of people, they say, hey, let's start a company, then they look at a lot of ideas, and then you start that. And that works for areas where you don't need too much deep domain expertise. But for this dual PhD problem, actually, you should maybe think about it a bit different. And that's actually also how we've been doing it at Merantix. So the way it works with us is that we actually just work with an individual person, with an individual potential founder, then ideate with that person. So look at a lot of different ideas, and based on the idea that person ultimately will build as a company, we actually also assemble the co-founders. So right now, for example, we have one co-founder who will start a company with us in the space of natural language processing, but like he's looking at a lot of different areas, and depending on where he's going to build the company, he will have a very different co-founder. And so I think the way basically ideation or team assembly should work should be very different. And this is you can also look at this maybe not just in a startup context, but potentially also in a corporate innovation context. So and so out of this, basically, you can also then derive like areas we are currently actively looking at. So we are looking at a lot of areas where there is this other hard science you can combine. And Cambrium, one of the companies we started this summer, is in the space of synthetic biology. So trying to create new biomaterials using also data and machine learning to optimize those. And that's a typical area, right? Like with your like middle or high school biology knowledge, you won't know enough. You need somebody who's really deep in that field, but you also need somebody who works with data and like making them talk together. And that was also an interesting process we saw internally. It takes some time until they start speaking the same language, but that's where there is a lot of true potential. And then you can also look at other areas like in healthcare, medicine, neuroscience. There are a lot of interesting areas in quantum space, geoengineering. So there are a lot of these areas, and so if you're interested, I think I would really urge you to pick one of those areas and dive really deeply there. That's the first part. Now let's talk about technological achievements. So far, most of our companies have been started more focused on computer vision, but we are now actually beyond the computer vision efforts, actually also looking at other areas and actually text. So if you think about yourself and myself, including, like we spend so much hours reading and writing text. We're basically like glorified text processing machines, if you want to put it very simple. Like the average worker spends 11 hours a week just on emails, reading them and writing them. And that doesn't even include you writing documents, being on messengers, communications, and all these things. So a lot of the human work is actually nothing but getting text in, processing it, and then writing text again. And so we're super excited about that as a like overarching paradigm. And I'm just giving you a recent example. This is like one application where it's about you got a received email, you want to draft a response, you write a few bullets, and bam, then it directly presents you like a fully written email that is, might have some things you can still optimize, but it's crazy what you can already do with natural language processing in this space. And this has really to do with also some recent achievements in natural language processing. If you think about the previous paradigm, how natural language processing worked, and this is also how much of other areas of machine learning worked, you took a lot of data, you trained some neural network, but then you basically fine-tuned it for a specific task. So depending on what you want to do, whether it's understanding, I don't know, financial statements, or whether it's understanding something in the insurance space, or other types of documents, you would then fine-tune it towards your text and your specific use case. And that's not super scalable, and that also means you need to have sufficient amounts of data for your use case, and it kind of limits how flexible your application are. And as many of you see, like OpenAI published GPT-3 in early 2020, where they basically had a new paradigm. They said, okay, we're gonna just train this model on all the data that is out there in the internet, like unlabeled, basically all the text you can find there. And then this model is generally applicable to many different types of applications. Sure, you could still fine-tune it, but already with this, it had basically seen most of the text that is out there. And that just is really mind-blowing, and I think is very interesting for looking forward. So just showing a few applications. So this is something where it's around filling out a balance sheet. The model contextualizes what's happening there, and then actually automatically fills in the spreadsheet. Or a second application, it's about like inferring some facts. These are all things which are basically in the model, and you can easily then say, okay, what's the founding date of Alaska, and then it will directly pump up this number. So it's crazy what's possible there. And another one is around code. So you just say, hey, I want this web page. It generates that, and you can see on the left it generated the entire code for this web page. So you can think about this model as one model that basically consumed all the text that is in the internet. And you also see that in the model size, right? Like this GPT-3 has 175 billion parameters. It's huge. It costs millions of dollars to train. The next model will likely cost tens of millions of dollars to train. So it's really expensive. It needs a heavy computation, but once you've trained it, you can basically apply it to a lot of different use cases. And if you think about it, the capabilities you can apply these models to, there are plenty, right? There's text classification, there's information extraction, semantic analysis, semantic search, which is more on the understanding side. So basically taking a text and understanding it. You can also, take the next level of conversational AI. You can start summarizing text. I mean, think about how many people spend so much time summarizing content into like a more condensed format. Language translation, especially if you think about languages that are more in the long tail, so basically not English. Code translation, so translating code between different languages. And then also on the generation side, so you can also think about writing text, and that could be kind of serving more the long tail. So think about like writing 100,000 product description, right? Like if you have an e-commerce store, like right now, a lot of that is done still manually, but given some of the structured information, you could automate that. So there are tons of applications, and just to list a few, we're basically right now looking at quite a few of them. We are also running already some pilot with customers with first versions of a product in 1 and 2 areas. So this is really like one space where we will generally go quite big on in the next 1 to 2 years. And you can look at the financial markets, you can look at HR, you can look at sales, you can look at code generally. There's plenty of opportunities. Now, the last one is the business model part. So this is very important, and as I said, often very overlooked. One thing we actually did with Merantix together with the University of St. Gallen, HSG, is to also further develop the business model canvas. So we took the very infamous business model canvas and said, okay, what do we need to add to also make it applicable for AI? Because a lot of things are similar, but also some things are different, right? For some things like data, like safety, like AI lifecycle are very specific elements you need to think about when you build an AI application. And so this is also a way how we internally think about different areas to look at before we start incubating a company. So feel free to check this out. We published this a few weeks ago, and we'll further develop that in the coming months. No, but like what I really want to talk about is standardization and types of AI applications. So one part of AI application is the vertical products. That's kind of what Vara, our medical imaging company, does. Breast cancer is a global problem, of course. It's relatively standardized globally, so you can really build one vertical product that serves the entire market, and you can go market by market, and the product is basically the same. So you have a very high degree of standardization. Then there's the other end of the spectrum, which is basically what Merantix Labs also does. So any consulting customized solutions, where you basically say, okay, you have a very specific problem, you want to get a solution for that specific problem, and that's it. But what's really interesting and is this middle ground, which is more kind of the self-service solutions, where you say, okay, I agree that not everybody will have the exact same problem, but I also don't want to build everything from scratch every time. So you're thinking about like solutions that are to some degree productized. So in our case, SEO Search, it's a data management solution, it's a product, we ship code, like Vara in some sense, but in the end, the customers do very different things with it. So one company is using that for their autonomous driving use case, another one is using that for their remote sensing application, which are very different applications, and we don't care. So where we basically say, okay, there's a product, but like everybody can customize it. And that space is super interesting. And if you think about how at least we internally thought the things would look like, we thought 5 years ago, we thought, okay, either you build a product and that's it, and you scale it like a normal vertical solution, or you say, okay, you fully customize it, and it's kind of a consulting solution. And anything in the middle basically is just like, okay, there is stuff where it's neither nor, but like whatever, let's ignore it. But like how we see it today, and this is a bit exaggerated, but I think for a lot of product applications of AI, you realize that it's maybe not that standardized across customers than you would think or than you imagine. And sure, medical imaging, maybe autonomous driving, there are a few where this is the case. But like for many, especially when you have to do also with more business processes, you realize, okay, every company is slightly different, or it's a manufacturing, every factory is a bit different. And then it starts to become difficult, and you're like, okay, yeah, trying to build a product, but also I don't want to customize too much, then it doesn't scale. And so I think we believe that this middle ground is actually super interesting, where you say, hey, we ship a product, but then we give people a lot of degree to customize it. And I think this boundary will even be pushed more. So we see that also now with Merantix Labs, where we run right now like individual projects with clients, and then after running 3-4 projects with different clients in very different industries, we realize, okay, wow, actually 80% of their problem is the same, even though the business process looks very different. And so especially in language processing, where it's around processing documents, we see, okay, actually, if we would have given them a self-service solution, they could probably customize it. And so I think this is very interesting. Obviously, you need to be a bit careful when you think about the characteristics of these self-service solutions. So you need to still make sure that there's some generalizability across organizations. You also need to make sure that kind of what cloud providers and I guess open source is pushing in the market is it fits nicely in with that, because the cloud providers have also very much noticed this, and so they put a lot of self-service solution out there, whether it's computer vision, natural language processing, recommender system, and so on. And so they are also pushing very much here, and there's also more and more open source, which is easier to use. So when you start trying to build a company in this space, you need to make sure that you're somehow more enterprisey probably than open source, or make sure you add a bit more value, but you also maybe not competing directly with the cloud providers, because that's also obviously something where you need to be a bit careful. You also need to make sure that the capabilities that the customers are there to customize the solution, and that depends really also who is there on the customer side. So it could be developer, it could be somebody like for SEO Search, data management. We're mostly selling that to developers, so they can also code, they can use the API. It's a different interface. For other applications, you might rather choose something like in the no-code, low-code space, where you say, okay, this is something where also a business person should be able to customize it. You need to make sure there's data available to the customer, because differently to Vara, where we don't need to train again at the customer because it's a globally standardized problem. In this case, I mean, because you're customizing, you also need to make sure that data is there in the right quality. And then there's still always this vertical versus horizontal trade-off in the end, where you say, okay, do I add a bit more functionality to my product, but then basically can potentially serve a smaller market? Or do I keep it a bit more shallow, but then you might not provide enough value to the customer? And so I think there are lots of areas where you can look at. I mean, quality control is a great example, where you say, okay, every factory produces different products. So yes, you want to ship a visual or acoustic quality control solution, which is a self-service solution, but then the customer can basically adapt it automatically, train it with their specific products, or predictive maintenance, very similar. Anything around documents, I think there's documents are very different in different companies, and so you also need some adoption. And then anything also in the data management, ML ops space, where you say, okay, we provide tools to enable others to build machine learning solutions. So these are all areas we're looking at. Business intelligence. I mean, we just started Cursor, and then data management, SEO search, and document understanding. We're also looking very, very heavily at right now. And so with this, I'd like to wrap up. If you want to join us, we have lots of open positions. If you want to found a company with us, if you want to build algorithms, if you want to work on the business or sales side, all based here in Berlin, both full-time and internships. And we're also opening an AI campus in Q1 2021. So with this, let's start with some questions. Thank you very much.
And we've got some questions already. The first one is it possible to invest as a private person in Merantix? Unfortunately, it was not possible for me to find Merantix equity.
We don't take investors into Merantix, but
right.
We have a fund, so through that, private persons can also invest. But they need to be above a certain threshold, so yeah.
All right. And the other question is also about money. Your total fund, how big is it? Is it 25 million euros, it says here? Yes, all right. And will this be enough for your ambitious projects? That's my question, no?
I mean, right now, the thing is, we're a very operational model, right? Like we're not writing checks, but we are actually building those companies from scratch. And so with the current setup, we believe we can basically start 8 more companies in the next 3.5 years.
Right.
But we couldn't build much more. And then, so the number of companies with our current setup is a bit limited. And then the other thing is, from Series A onwards, we are also taking in external investors and funds into the companies. So then for the follow-up rounds, for example, for Vara, we did a Series A earlier this year. We also took a few investors from the outside to further capitalize the companies.
Right, and I wonder how you pick the companies you wanna build up. I mean, you showed the overview of the topics that are particularly hot or interesting at the moment. Are you looking for companies in these certain sectors, or do you see what people offer you and then just choose the best ones, even if they're all quantum computing companies, for instance?
No, we try to diversify it, right? So we also, and we sometimes even, pick founders in residence based on certain areas we want to get in. So for example, biology was a space we were very excited about, and so we looked very focused for a founder who would start a company in that space with us. So sometimes it's also a bit targeted. We would not start 5 companies too close to each other, because also we want the companies to collaborate very openly with each other, and if they would be in competition, it would be a bit harder to collaborate, and so that's why there needs to be like a certain distance between the companies.
Right, and this next question might be a little philosophical maybe, but you talked extensively about natural language processing, and there was this really great example of a long email coming in with business proposal, and then you have like 4 little answers, like yes, no, we only give half of what you want, or whatever. And then it's turned into a big email again. And I bet on the other end, if this future comes to pass, would again be like an AI dumbing it down, then expanding it. Shouldn't we then skip the whole procedure of writing long letters and just say 94 million or 940 million or what it was?
That might happen. It might be that like you just end up sending like structured information, some bullets, and then in the end you have some AI or some model on your side in the end that kind of presents it to you in the right format you want to read it. And so if you feel like you want to read a full email, then you show it as an email. If you're like, hey, I don't want to read all this like text, just summarize it to me in bullets, then you could just get the bullet format. So I think,
and if I'm a romantic person, I could say make it nice, and then it adds additional lubricant. Okay, that's very interesting. Isn't this also for tech savvy people like us? If I, for instance, rent your solution or use it as a service, isn't that a bit cheating? I mean, for people who really put in the effort, write the email, or think, oh man, this Daniel, he's so nice, he writes me a long letter.
Yeah, I think we will get used to it. I think like right now it feels very weird. Probably in like 20 years, it's so normal that you know that like a lot of the text you read is not written by a human. Like that's like a mental concept in our brain that like text is generated by humans, but like why should it be, right? Like
And if you because yesterday we were talking about like artificial persons and actors maybe that can be put in film. Do you think if I have a particularly good or distinct writing style that this will be patented? There will be like an Umberto Eco AI, and the heirs will have the rights to his particular style. Do you see this coming?
I think there will be ways where you say, okay, put that into a specific style of writing,
Right.
or like put that into my style of writing, because I agree, like everybody has some, like a certain style how they write emails, right? And so it's distinct. But I think you can also learn that from your historic emails. If you would give me all your historic emails, we could probably build something that sounds very much like you based on that data. So
are you using prototypes of this already?
yeah, we're working on this internally. It's more internally, not to the outside. No, like
okay. I was not right. I didn't want to go paranoid. Like, is Rasmus' email legit? No. But how do you use it? I mean, do you just play around with it, or are there
we're playing around. Like we have a few prototypes right now. We're running a few things with customers. I mean, this is a space. The founder in residence who's looking at this, he started this summer, so he was a first employee at a legal tech startup near the OpenAI ecosystem. So he has a lot of experience in that space, and so with him we'll now double down on starting something there.
Adrian told us yesterday that for every job in the company, he has like 50 people applying for it, and he told us that now he can, because they're all talented, he can choose the nicest people, right? And I just wanted to get your perspective as a CTO. Are you also looking for the nicest people, or is it sometimes just the guy who's the most brilliant coder? Or
no, I think we look for both. I mean, probably Adrian mentioned that yesterday. We're doing on-site days with everyone, so everybody has to come 2 days on site and work for us and with us. And so with that, you really get to know the person. This is like, because like for all, we have like online tests and like, things which are more like quantitative and also in the interviews, but like in the end, you also want to see like, can you collaborate with this person? Because as I said, with the dual PhD problem, they will have to work with people who have very different backgrounds, and that needs to work, because otherwise you will not build a successful company.
Right. Are there still things at the moment that you cannot do or cannot find and are desperately looking for, like a certain person with these or that qualifications, or a certain startup which is doing something where you just desperately want to get something and don't have it yet?
I mean, we are always hiring founders and residents. I think that's the thing where we have like a lot of applications, but it's in the end it's still like hundreds of applications of which only very few get hired. So I think because also the founder DNA is very mixed. Like some have like super technical background, come right off academia, and have the drive to start a business. Some have domain knowledge in a very interesting domain. Some have started a company before. So people have very different backgrounds, and that's that makes it also very interesting, very wide the funnel. But like in the end, we need to drill it down.
Sure. Like obviously, you're starting next year in April. You'll open your doors in Berlin. I think this will be the beginning of something great. Tell us about your plans for the next 5 years, or maybe not plans, but visions. Like, what do you think in 2025? What will we look back at, and how do you see Merantix, but also your many companies there?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the next 3-4 years are really about basically deploying the fund and building the next 10 companies, and I think that will then be really the foundation to scale it. And I think scaling you could do in different directions, right? Like you could either say, okay, now let's see how we can build even more companies at the same time, or we say, hey, how can we kind of do that with even more capital, even more human resources, and maybe then the 5-10 years after we start similar amount of companies, but like with much more capital. So like that's still up to our discussion.
And just of course, like just at the moment, do you think there's a good chance that you will stay in Berlin?
Yeah. We have. I mean, we have all our people are in Berlin. We've been here. We will stay here. We think Berlin is great for attracting talent internationally, and it's also getting even better with everything happening around the world. I think Berlin is very well positioned, and so we believe very much in this, like in the end, like water cooler chat and this like exchange of people, which obviously now it's a bit of an anti-COVID thesis, but like I think especially in this early phase is super important, and so that's why we want people to be close to each other. Although it's rather the Mio Mio Mate crate talk in Berlin, not the water cooler. Okay, we're very glad to have you in Berlin. Thank you very much, and good luck with Merantix. Thank you very much.